All right, today I'm here with Dan Morgenstern, and this is a subject that mutual friends of ours have asked me to get Dan to talk about, and it's called, quote, under the influence, close quote, and my generation knows it as something different, but what is under the influence?
Well, under the influence can be many things, but in this particular case, related to the music, of course, it's being under the influence of what has now become a legal substance, but then when I became acquainted with it, definitely was not. And it's very germane to jazz and has a long history with the music, including a number of great songs recorded by Stuff Smith, Cab Calloway, Buster Bailey, many others. O'Neill Spencer does a vocal. It's called Viper Mad.
Yeah.
It was really originally Pleasure Mad and was a tune composed by Sidney Bechet in the 20s. They got a lot of recording. Was recorded by bands like Benny Kruger and so on. But the lyric as Viper Mad is really intense, and O'Neill Spencer gives it a great reading. There's something about tea, and it had many synonyms. It's interesting that in a movie called International House, there is, which is a great movie, highly recommended. It's like a late Mack Sennett kind of thing. The Cab Calloway band does Reefer Man. Reefer Man, this is before the Harrison Act, which made marijuana an illegal substance, and it was really a very, dirty thing to do and an ignorant thing to do. That's when there was a terrible movie showing people going crazy.
Reefer Madness.
Reefer Madness,
Yeah.
which is, aside from being stupid, it's a very bad film. But I was introduced to it really by my, I call him my Virgil, Nat Lorber, Nat Face Lorber, trumpet player, and known to everyone. He was a protege of Hot Lips Page. He introduced me to Lips and Lips' music, which was a very important thing for me, and also of Roy Eldridge. They both really loved him, and Lips called him Shorty because he was short, and he pronounced it with his Texas accent, so it came out as Shouty, Shouty. And Roy called him Space Cadet. But Nat introduced me to the substance, and I remember exactly when and where. I mean, when it was reasonably early in my American life, but where it was in Harlem, and it was outdoors, and it was in the summer, and sitting on a bench in the park near 135th Street. And we were going to listen to some live music. This wonderful woman whom I've talked about, Jean Falos, who really introduced me to Louis, was doing some jam sessions at a place called the Club Harlem. And we went to sit in the park there. Like I said, it was a nice day. And it was Nat, and we were kind of a trio. Stephen Tropp, I don't know whether I ever talked about Steve.
You haven't mentioned him.
But Steve was a very strange guy, very bright, and in terms of becoming a friend of mine, he was of Austrian Jewish origin, and his father was a Reichian analyst. Remember, right, to put people in the orgone box and stuff. I never met his father because he was divorced from his mother. I didn't meet his mother. Steve was a gifted poet, really. The only published thing I know, except individual things, and there is a reading by him, very brief, on a Folkways LP that has some other poetry on it. But he was a drummer. And if he had had the discipline to really stick with it, he was a very good drummer. He had great time and taste. He worked professionally several times. There was a fine baritone player named Pinky Williams, who had a brother who was a tenor player who briefly subbed for Ben Webster in the Ellington band. But he worked with Pinky on the road and stuff. I don't think any recordings exist, and he was very good on brushes. But he was a good poet. There's a little thing self-published, little paperback. It's not even a book. It's like a little, piece together thing. It's called Mozart in Hell. And I can't quote one of the great lines from it because it is still not, even today, with all the libertarian thing. And it would also get me in trouble because of it. There have been many issues. But anyway,
Okay.
Stevie was.
I'll look it up.
And Stevie, if it can be found, I have it somewhere. It's very precarious because it's just paper. The three of us were sitting on a bench, and it was Nat who was holding, as we said, who had the stuff, and it lit up, and it was new to me, made me cough a little bit, and immediately got me high, And Steve started reciting some poetry, which sounded great to me, and I wasn't even sure whether it was by him. I asked him whether it was by Rimbaud, which is great. So we sat around for a while and talked, and I got this thing also looking at the park, the trees looked beautiful and everything, and then we went to the session. And both of them played, actually, but there was some other guy. Joe Thomas was at this session because Joe was very friendly with Gene. And there were some beboppers, too, because Gene had also befriended a young black man who was into bebop, and she helped him get published a little book called To Be or Not to Bop. His name was Nard Griffin. And the book is extraordinary because it's more like a little pamphlet. It also has photographs by him. And it's really the first substantial thing. It wasn't much longer than maybe a 2 or 3 part magazine article, but it was something. So anyway, there were some young beboppers there too. And I remember, listening to the music with Joe Thomas and everything, it sounded marvelous. And the thing that it does to you, needless to say, is it changes your perception of time. And what is great about it is that it doesn't distort the time relationship in itself. It makes you feel that it's longer, but it doesn't affect the real natural speed or anything. It's not like it, In other words, it's very real, but it gives you a depth, spatial perception. It's great. It's great for listening. And it's done a lot for me. This was the first time live. And I remember standing when the boppers were playing, and they were not very good, but and I was standing with Joe, and I forget who the other guy was, somebody well known, and one of them listening to these young musicians say, they're not telling a story. Telling a story meant that you said something in a solo, that told a story. I don't think it needs any more explanation than it means something. So that wasn't there. But getting back to the substance.
What did you call
cannabis.
what did you call the substance in 1947 or 1948?
Well, there were several words for it: gauge, pot, tea. So we usually, let's see, we had our own name for it. Well, one is a four-letter word.
Starting
Can I
with,
say it?
yeah, of course, starting with S.
Sure, yeah, yeah. So, man, this is some great shit. Quality at that time. I mean, now I haven't indulged in quite a while because seriously, I don't want to because it's so much stronger now. I mean, everybody tells me that it's much, much stronger than what, and I haven't done it in years anyway because, you know, I have a heart condition and I don't want to take any stupid risks. And besides, I don't need it anymore. But it's great for other things too, you know, I mean, but anyway, copying was a problem, you know, that was the negative part of it. And I remember once going uptown with Nat, and he was going to cop, you know, and he left me at a luncheonette, you know. He really said I'll be back, you know, in half an hour. He didn't come back for about an hour and a half, and I became very uncomfortable sitting there, not because it was in Harlem, but just sitting in a place for so long. It's peculiar, you know. So he finally did show up. But they had a jukebox, and on it there was a Lester Young record called Up and Atom, which was a little bit of a hit for Brad. So I must have heard that about a zillion times. But getting back to early experience, you know, we used to listen to records, mostly at my house. I lived with my mother then, but she was away at work, you know. So, the first Louis record that Nat made me listen to, I had a bunch of Louis Deckers. And he picked one, you know. And it wasn't even the one that was one of the most famous. It wouldn't have come to mind immediately. But that's what he suggested that we listen to. And that's a thing called, Was I to Blame for Falling in Love with You?
Victor Young.
So that really made me aware of what this could do in terms of listening. And it's great, it's very deep, you know. So it was like hearing it for the first time and hearing details, you know. Hearing Louis' voice, when he recorded it, he was having a little tonsil struggle, so his voice is a little different. It's a bit nasal, but lovely, you know. It's great vocal. Anyway, you know, that got me hooked. There is no such thing as being addicted to, you know, to pot, whatever you want to call it. It's not addicting. I mean, anything can be addicting from a psychological point of view, but, you know, biological, it's not addicting. And I never had that problem with it. Sometimes we would delve into it when it was available, there were hashish. You had to be careful with that because that would really get you out there. But there were various, you know. I remember once I was the one who copped, and usually we didn't do big quantities because didn't, you know, it is always a risk, of course. But this was a fair amount, like maybe a quarter pound, you know, it's a fair amount. And I had it on me, and I had to meet that at the Copper Rail. The Copper Rail, have we talked about the Copper Rail?
Yeah.
The Copper Rail was a wonderful place. Anyway, there I was with this thing on me, and I was sitting at the bar, and Emmett Barry came in, and I had a long talk with Emmett Barry, and I said to myself, Jesus, I hope nothing will happen, because poor Emmett, you know, maybe he'll have guilt by association or something. But no, of course nothing happened, and I never got in trouble. not long before I knew him, this was still, I guess it was in the late 30s when he was quite young, got busted and spent not a long time, but about a month or 6 weeks in jail, you know. What did they call that in New York? There was a place called, it had a nickname.
Not the tombs.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
That's,
And he said that he was interviewed by a psychologist, you know, and the psychologist, after a while, he asked him some questions and so on, and it come out that he was a musician. The guy was a jazz fan, so he got him out as quickly as possible, you know. But that was fortunate. That was so stupid, you know. What they did to Lester Young, you know. But you know, Lester famously was, you know, put into the detention barracks at the TB Blues.
yeah.
But Zoot Sims told me that he was on a tour with Lester, one of the Jazz Philharmonic things. So they spent some time together, you know, but on plane trips. He said that the press told him that when he was in the DB, you know, they had a terrible band, and he asked the guy in charge whether he could, you know, do something with the band, and it was just okay. So he said to Jude, I took over the band and I made them sound like some. He said, I made those MFs sound pretty good. You know? So this shows that the thing that you usually hear, you know, that it was a tragic experience and that he handled it well. And Gil Evans, who happened to be stationed at the place where this DB barracks was, it was a regular, you know, a regular army base. And Gil was stationed there at the time. So they found out that Lester was there, and they got permission to bring him out, and they would have jam sessions and stuff, and you know, so he actually, I wouldn't say that he had a good time there,
Yeah.
but he certainly put it to good use, and the idea that it, you know, that it marred him for life, or this is sentimental crap, you know, that there's too much of that, unfortunately, in, you know, jazz history as rendered by pretty much outsiders.